If you'd asked me back in 2016, I would have said family comes first, even before my own dreams. I grew up believing that as sure as the red maples dropped their leaves each November in Amherst. I never imagined that one day, the things I gave up for my family would become so invisible. There's a funny comfort to returning home for Thanksgiving, the way the kitchen always smells of pumpkin pie and roasted turkey, and the football game hums in the living room, mixing with laughter. Even now, in my late 20s, I still walk in through the side door, shake the chill off my coat, and expect to see everything just as it was when I left for college. Dad still wears his old Patriots sweatshirt and yells at the TV. Mom hums along to old folk songs as she cooks, and Rachel, my younger sister, trails paint on her sleeves and talks a mile a minute about her next art show. But that year, things felt different. There was a tension behind Dad's smiles, and Mom's laugh seemed thinner, brittle. When I hugged them, I noticed how tired they looked, the new lines around their eyes, the way Mom squeezed me just a little tighter. Rachel arrived late, distracted, eyes glued to her phone. I asked who she was texting, and she just blushed and mumbled something about a guy named Ethan, her new boyfriend. I settled into my old routines, grateful for the small joys, sipping apple cider at the kitchen table while Mom whipped cream for the pies, playing board games with Rachel, listening to Dad complain about the Patriots' defense. But even as we sat down for Thanksgiving dinner, I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. The meal was delicious, as always, but the conversation felt forced. Dad kept glancing at Mom, and Rachel kept tapping away at her phone. It wasn't until dessert that Dad finally cleared his throat and set down his fork. "Lauren, we need to talk," he said quietly. Mom reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "We're behind on the mortgage," he confessed, voice barely above a whisper. 3 months now. I've tried to keep up, but with my hours cut at the school and your mother's catering slowing down, we just can't catch up. His words hung in the air, heavy and cold. I looked around the table. Rachel was scrolling through texts, oblivious, and Mom's eyes were wet. I felt my heart twist. This was the house where we'd celebrated every birthday, every graduation, every Christmas morning. I thought of all the memories layered in these walls. "What's the plan?" I asked gently. "We've talked to the bank, but unless we pay what's owed, they'll foreclose by New Year's," Dad said, shame burning in his cheeks. "We don't want to burden you." I shook my head. "You're not a burden. Let's look at this together." I asked for the numbers, and after dinner, we spread the paperwork on the kitchen counter. Mortgage statements, overdue notices, bills, each page felt like a new stone on my chest. Rachel wandered off to FaceTime with Ethan, her laughter echoing down the hall. As I ran the numbers, I realized I could do it. I'd been saving for a down payment on my own place, but I had enough to cover what was needed if I adjusted my plans. "Here's what I think," I said finally. "I can help you get current on the mortgage, and if I keep making the payments, we can put the house in my name when it's paid off. Like an investment. You keep living here as long as you want, but the deed transfers to me when the loan is done. We'll make it official." Dad's eyes filled with tears he tried to hide. Mom reached for me. "We never wanted it to come to this," she whispered. "You've always been our rock, Lauren." "It's just a house," I said, even though it was never just a house. "We're family. We take care of each other." We drew up a basic contract, nothing fancy, just a promise on paper that after 7 years of payments, the house would be mine. Dad signed, his hands shaking. Mom hugged me again, and I could feel her relief as much as her regret. Rachel drifted back in, phone still in hand, asking if I could give her a ride to the art supply store the next morning. She barely noticed the papers on the counter or the new tension in the room. I felt a pang, wondering when she'd become so distant, so wrapped up in her own world. The next morning, I woke early, the house still and quiet. I sat at the kitchen table, writing the first check to the bank, making a list of contractors for the repairs Dad had put off for years. I felt proud and a little scared. Was I doing the right thing or just delaying the inevitable? Ben, my friend from work, texted to check in. I told him a little, not everything. He replied, "Family's worth it. Just make sure you're not the only one holding the rope." Later, I found Rachel at the kitchen sink, smiling at her phone. "Hey, Laure, could you maybe help me meet Ethan next weekend? He's amazing. You'll love him." I agreed, thinking I'd do anything for my sister, still not knowing how much our lives would change. That afternoon, as Dad watched football and Mom prepared leftovers, I sat in my old high school sweatshirt and looked around the house I'd just promised to save. There's a saying, we make our choices and then our choices make us. I felt needed. I felt hopeful. I just didn't know that by holding us together, I was slowly letting myself slip away. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a quiet voice wondered what the cost would be when sacrifices start to disappear. It's funny how fast a guest can become the center of a family, especially when he's exactly what your parents always dreamed of. The winter after I took over the mortgage, Rachel brought Ethan home for the holidays, and it didn't take long for the house to rearrange itself around him. Ethan was tall, broad-shouldered, and quick with compliments. He showed up with a bottle of imported wine, calling my mother's cooking inspired, and took to chatting with Dad about college football as if they'd been tailgating together for years. He even fixed the back porch step without being asked, which won him points right away. Rachel was radiant. Her smile seemed wider, her eyes brighter, and even her laugh was lighter in Ethan's company. At dinner, he raised a toast to family, old memories, and new beginnings. Dad clapped him on the back. Mom blushed at his praise. When Rachel giggled at one of his stories, Ethan would sometimes interrupt to clarify the details or gently correct her about something trivial. I tried not to mind, but those moments stuck with me, small needles in the fabric of a happy evening. The holidays came and went in a blur of activity. Christmas Eve meant board games and gingerbread cookies, the house filled with warmth and music. I spent hours in the kitchen with Mom, while Ethan and Dad set up the new smart TV Ethan had found on sale. When I offered to help, Dad waved me off. "Ethan's got it, honey. You work too hard as it is." It stung more than I wanted to admit. I juggled my job in Boston and trips home to help with repairs, still sending money each month for the mortgage and bills. But more and more, I felt like I was slipping into the background. Rachel and Ethan were the new golden pair. Rachel's art flourished. Ethan talked about supporting her creative spirit. My parents, once so anxious, seemed suddenly buoyed by this fresh hope. When spring came, Ben invited me up to New Hampshire for a weekend hike. He'd just inherited his grandparents' cabin near Lake Winnipesaukee, and he wanted to show me the trails. "You need a break," he said. "Let's get out of the city and breathe a little." The drive north, windows down and country radio playing, felt like shedding a heavy coat. In the woods, among the pines and the hush of wind, I could finally hear myself think. We hiked for hours, talking about nothing and everything: work, family, the weird loneliness of growing up. "Ever thought about getting your own place out here?" Ben asked, handing me a granola bar as we watched the sun sink behind the trees. I smiled, imagining a cabin of my own, somewhere quiet and safe, untouched by old family scripts. Back home, The rhythms of family life changed around Ethan's presence. 4th of July barbecues became his show. He'd man the grill, swap stories with Dad, teach Rachel how to make the perfect burger. My parents glowed with pride, telling neighbors how lucky Rachel was. My contributions, paying the plumber, fixing the roof, writing checks, felt invisible, almost unmentionable. At Rachel's birthday, Dad made a speech about how Ethan keeps this family together. He never mentioned the contract I'd signed, the years of payments. I sat beside Ben, our knees touching under the picnic table, feeling oddly detached, as if I were watching a play I'd once starred in. Ethan wasn't cruel. He was polite, helpful, always ready with a compliment or a joke. But I noticed how he controlled the conversation, how Rachel's voice would fade when he disagreed, how Mom started looking to him for advice on everything from groceries to landscaping. Even the family dog followed Ethan around. The house was shifting, the gravity moving away from me. Fall brought more changes. Rachel moved back home for a while, just until her next gallery show, she said. Ethan started leaving clothes in the downstairs closet, fixing the garage door, updating the thermostat. Then joked one night, at this rate, they'll have him running for mayor. I laughed, but there was a kernel of truth. The more Ethan became part of our daily life, the less space there seemed for me. I worked longer hours in Boston, sometimes crashing at Ben's when I couldn't face another awkward dinner at home. Still, I kept up the repairs, sent the checks, made myself useful. If anyone noticed how much I was giving, they didn't say. Gratitude had slipped quietly into expectation, and I didn't realize how easy it was for love to become a transaction. At Thanksgiving, Ethan arrived early to help Mom with the turkey. Dad pulled me aside, almost as an afterthought, and said, "You're coming for Christmas, right? Rachel and Ethan want to do this Secret Santa this year." I nodded, feeling more like a guest than a daughter. The real turning point came at a holiday dinner. The house was warm and bright, candles flickering, snow falling outside. After dinner, as we passed around apple pie, Dad raised his glass and said, "This old place has seen a lot. But with Rachel and Ethan here, it finally feels young again." He smiled at Ethan. "Maybe it's time this house really becomes theirs someday, eh?" No one mentioned my name, or the contract, or the years of payments. My fork clattered softly on my plate. Rachel reached for my hand under the table, but her eyes darted to Ethan, searching for his approval. I squeezed her fingers, unsure who I was comforting. That night, I drove back to Boston through thick, silent snow. Streetlights blurred in my rearview mirror. I turned the radio off, trying to remember when I started feeling like a visitor in my own family. The roads were slick, the world outside cold, but inside my car, the ache was lonelier than any winter storm. I wondered, for the first time, how much of myself I'd given away and whether anyone had truly noticed. By the time the last mortgage payment cleared in January 2023, the old house on Maple Lane barely resembled the one I'd grown up in. The faded siding had been replaced with crisp blue boards. The roof gleamed under new shingles. Every room had my touch, paint colors I'd picked, light fixtures I'd installed on a Saturday with my hands covered in dust and sweat. For years, I'd driven home from Boston on weekends, rolling up my sleeves, putting my savings and my heart into making this place something beautiful. Now it looked almost new. But instead of feeling at home, I felt like a guest, one with good credit and a toolkit. I framed the paid in full statement and tucked it into the kitchen drawer with my copy of the contract. That night, Mom made pot roast, Rachel brought over a bottle of Prosecco, and we toasted to family. The mood was cheerful, but I noticed how quickly the conversation shifted away from me. Rachel beamed, talking about her latest art exhibit, and Ethan raved about a new consulting project in New Haven. Dad thanked me for the repairs, but in the next breath, started asking Ethan's advice about the garden fence. A few weeks later, Rachel called, squealing, giddy. Ethan had proposed. It was perfect, Lore. I want you to be my maid of honor. Suddenly, everything became wedding talk. Every family dinner was a blur of save-the-date cards, catering menus, Pinterest boards, and flower samples. I helped Rachel search for a dress and kept my opinions gentle. But there was a running tally in my head, how many deposits I'd paid, how many nights I'd stayed up calculating what I could spare after the mortgage, how little any of that was mentioned now. It all melted into the background, as if that was just what big sisters did. When it got too loud or too much, I escaped to my cabin by Lake Winnipesaukee. I'd bought it on a whim after a rough week at work, drawn in by the pine trees and the way the sunrise glittered on the water. The place was old and drafty, with creaking floors and windows that rattled in the wind. But it was mine, no family obligations, no unspoken debts. Ben drove up some weekends, always bringing a box of pastries from a bakery in town. We'd spend mornings fixing a leaky faucet or patching drywall, then sit on the dock, sipping coffee and watching loons skim the surface. It was the first place I'd ever truly exhaled. One Sunday, I drove down to Amherst for brunch. The house looked perfect, flower beds mulched, porch newly painted, Rachel's engagement photos framed on the mantel. Dad flipped pancakes, Ethan made mimosas, and Mom set the table with her best china. Halfway through the meal, Dad smiled at Ethan and Rachel. This house is just right for starting your life together. Feels like it's always been waiting for you too. I felt the words like a door closing. The contract, the years of payments, my name on the deed, none of it spoken out loud. Mom squeezed my hand. Lauren, you have your beautiful cabin now. Let your sister have her start here. I tried to smile. After brunch, as I tidied up in the living room, Rachel found me, her face clouded. I'm sorry if it feels like everyone's ignoring you, she whispered. Wedding stuff is overwhelming. She paused, voice dropping. Ethan's been handling all the money and sometimes I feel like I can't say no to his choices. He says it's just easier if he manages it. She glanced away, twisting her ring. But sometimes I feel like a kid asking for an allowance. I wanted to reach out, to warn her, but the words stuck. I was always the fixer, but this time, my hands were full of their mess too. The wedding planning sessions moved to my parents' dining room. I watched my credit card cover deposits, photographer, florist, caterer, each swipe a silent agreement. I wondered when helping had become expected. Ben called to check in, suggesting a weekend at the cabin, just us, no family, no spreadsheets. I clung to the invitation, grateful for the chance to be myself. One evening, after a long day of errands for Rachel's wedding, I came home to the Amherst house. The sun slanted through the bay window, lighting up the pale blue walls I'd painted myself. The room was immaculate, ready for photos and celebrations. I stood in the middle of it alone, hearing my own footsteps echo. I thought about all the hours and money I'd poured into these rooms. And I realized that no matter what the paperwork said, this place might never truly belong to me. Out on the porch, Rachel scrolled through wedding ideas on her phone, barely noticing as I stepped past her. The sky was turning a soft lavender above the rooftops. For every wall I painted and every check I sent, it felt like I was writing myself out of my own story. Sometimes, loving your family means learning where to draw the line. But for now, I just watched the dust gather, hoping the cost wouldn't be more than I could bear. Weddings are supposed to be joyful, but there are moments you replay forever. The applause, the champagne, and the way my name quietly vanished from the conversation. I spent my sister's wedding night watching the life I'd built get handed to someone else. The morning of Rachel's wedding dawned warm and clear, the first real day of spring in Amherst. I woke before sunrise, lying in my old bed and listening to the sounds of the house stirring, a faucet turning on, Mom humming in the kitchen, distant laughter as the caterers set up tents in the backyard. It all felt familiar and foreign, a memory I was still living in but no longer belonged to. Rachel and I got ready together in her childhood room, surrounded by curling irons and bouquets of pale pink peonies. She was radiant in her dress, but her hands trembled as she tried to pin a strand of hair. I studied her fingers, hiding my own nerves. "You look beautiful," I whispered, meaning it. She smiled, then glanced at her phone. "A message from Ethan," I guessed. The backyard had been transformed. A white tent stretched over rows of chairs, fairy lights twinkled from the old maple tree, and a floral arch framed the spot where Rachel and Ethan would say their vows. The air was thick with the smell of brisket from the smoker, the sharp tang of cut grass, the soft sweetness of spring. Guests drifted in: Ethan's family from Connecticut, cousins from across New England, our high school friends in pastel dresses. Dad grinned in his suit, fussing with the playlist. Mom fluttered between tables, making sure everything was perfect. I moved through the crowd, helping where I could, reminding myself that today was about Rachel.